Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. Hey, what's up, 8-Bit crew? Today is Thursday, September 10th, 2020, and this is episode 7 of the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast. I've got a great show lined up for you today. Later on, Steve Capone joins me and discusses a different method of grading that he's using in some of his classes. After last week's discussion about the history of grading, we've got some interesting new things being done with grading that might give you some good ideas that you can use in your class. I've got a great website in the treasure chest ready for you. But first, let's look at some news and updates. From the IXL blog, IXL has rolled out some new SAT, ACT study plans for students. If you're not familiar with IXL, it is a math and English website that develops personalized skills for students, setting up diagnostics for where they currently are and giving them personalized exercises. Now they have SAT and ACT study plans. If students have taken either of those tests before, they can enter their previous scores, or if they haven't taken them before, they can enter target scores, and it will give them personalized study plans, exercises to do to help improve where they currently are. So if students have maybe a specific college that they're wanting to go to that has some target scores for the SAT, they can put those on there, and then it will give them exercises to help them to obtain those scores. So it's a really good new thing that they're implementing. I've used IXL before in my class, and it is very helpful as far as giving students some personalized education goals and learning exercises. And some Google news. Google Images has added some more features to help find licensing imaging information in Google Images. So they've added a few new things. First of all, when you do a search in Google Images, you'll start to see a licensable badge on the picture itself. So kind of down in the bottom left corner of the picture, it will say licensable, which will indicate that the picture has some type of license, whether it's Creative Commons or professional, personal license, to help be able to filter and find images that you can use properly under copyright laws. Also, this has been there for a while, but you can actually filter through based on different licenses. So if you do a Google image search and then click on the tools button in the top bar, you'll see a drop-down tab that says usage rights, and you can select Creative Commons licensing, or you can look at commercial and other licensing. So Creative Commons licensing is one where it's free to use. And so if you filter by that, you can find images that are free to use without having to pay for license usage and all that. So that's a good thing for teachers to model, as well as something that students should be learning, some of those digital citizenship skills that often get missed here and there. Additionally, they're also implementing some updates with that, where you can also see any kind of information related to crediting the image, the actual copyright, and the creator. So they're adding a lot of these features to help make sure that students, teachers, anybody using Google is able to find and use proper licensing information to help ensure that we're all following these copyright laws. So that's something to keep in mind. I know as teachers, we often have this habit of just pulling stuff from the internet without worrying about crediting and whatnot. So like I said, this is one of those good things that is helpful for us as teachers to model for our students, and then maybe show them how we found this licensing information and all that. So that will take care of news and updates for this week. I hope you guys had a great Labor Day weekend, got some rest over the long weekend, and are getting back into the swing of things. But next up, we will take a look and see what we have inside the treasure chest. Today's treasure chest is actually a website that I came across about a year ago that I have been using a lot, and I think it is a wonderful little website. It's called yellkey.com. And what Yellkey is a URL shortener, very similar to Bitly, but it has two distinct differences that I really like about it. The first is that it is a temporary URL shortener. So you can set the time frame for how long these URLs are good for, up to 24 hours. So if you have something that you just need students to go to one day in class and you don't want to create a Bitly link that is going to be permanent forever, Yellkey is a great option for that. So when you set it up, maybe 8 a.m. In the morning, it will be good until 8 a.m. the following day. And so I really like that for things that I use just real quick in class. The other thing that I like about it is that it uses actual words. So instead of a bunch of letters and numbers like what you might get in Bitly or Google or something like that, you get an actual word that makes it easy for students to remember. So I might have a URL that's yellkey.com/book. And so you can tell students, go to yellkey.com/book, and it's easy to remember, and they don't have to worry about messing up any letters and numbers in there, clicking links. So check that out, yellkey.com. I'll link to it in the show notes. It's a great little resource for those quick links that you might be using in class. All right, well, I hope you're ready to level up, because in today's boss battle, Steve Capone joins me and we tackle this issue of a new way of grading. That's up next. Today on the episode, we have Steve Capone, who is a teacher out in Utah. Steve grew up in Pennsylvania and attended liberal arts college there, Washington and Jefferson College, where he double majored in philosophy and English. He attended graduate school at the University of Chicago, where he earned a master's degree in humanities, and also went to the University of Utah, where he earned a Master of Science in philosophy. He's been teaching since 2008 and has taught around 25 college courses, mostly in the field of philosophy. He's also been teaching young people since 2013. His students have ranged from second and third graders to seventh and eighth graders. In his last 3 years, he's been with middle school students, though he moonlights at a local state university teaching ethics. Steve is presented at state as well as national conferences in Utah and at AMLE and NCSS, respectively. He's spent several months abroad over the last 10 years, often in Germany, and always researching for whatever he's writing at those times. So, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. Before we begin, I want to do a fun little question, and then we'll get into the education stuff. So I got a would you rather question ready for you, okay?
Sounds good.
So would you rather be a deep sea diver or an astronaut?
Wow. I have to say a deep sea diver.
Okay.
And being a good student as well as teacher, I'll tell you why. First of all, I'm just terrified of the idea of being in outer space. Mm-hmm. The idea is just scary. And I've always wanted to be my secret... first of all, my secret other job in my imagination is that I'm a wedding planner. But beyond that, I'm a marine biologist.
Nice.
And as a kid, I would spend as many hours as I was permitted to be in a swimming pool, I would spend in the pool. And if we took a beach vacation, and even as an adult, whenever I've been at the beach, I will spend 3 to 4 hours at a time just kind of tooling around looking at underwater life. And so the emptiness of space terrifies me, and underwater life fascinates me. So I think I would rather be under the sea than up in the air.
Okay, this seems like a pretty straightforward one for you. I had a hard time with that one, but I think I landed on deep sea diver just because it's closer to the Earth.
I think, if I could be a researcher as an astronaut, I would be into that.
Yeah.
It's just the whole strapping myself to a giant rocket and being launched into the unknown.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so let's get into it. And before we talk about kind of your content stuff, what is? Tell us your story real quick. What is it that got you into teaching?
I didn't really know that I was going to be a teacher until somewhat later in life. When I was a young kid, I loved learning, and then something happened where I got bored in middle school and early high school, and I just couldn't stand it. I didn't want to be in a classroom. I didn't want to be told what to do or what to study, and I thought I hated learning, and at one point I even thought I couldn't learn certain things. I really had that fixed mindset of being kind of a broken thinker, and it wasn't until college and then grad school where I really felt ownership over the things that I was learning, and I wanted to tell others everything that I knew. And sometimes that's a little bit overbearing, but from that point, I decided what I really wanted to do was get into a classroom and help other people understand that there's a lot of cool stuff to learn about in the world. And in grad school, I began teaching undergraduate courses, mostly in philosophy, everything from logic to ethics to intro classes to a class called Human Nature. I'm still not sure what that means, but I taught the class on it, and I loved it. Every minute I was in a classroom, I loved it. And I decided, I think just in the process of learning how to teach, that was my calling. That was what I needed to do.
Nice.
And honestly, I was as surprised as anyone else around me that I ended up being a teacher.
Huh. It's funny how that happens sometimes.
Yeah. And the aspect of it that I didn't mention was getting the opportunity to travel really gave me my passion contributed to my passion for learning about history in particular, which is a main subject area for me in the middle school. I teach in an interdisciplinary model in which I'm kind of the history guy on the team. English, science, and history work together. We develop lesson plans together. And then the reason I got into history was that I had seen all these places in Rome and Berlin and Prague, and I really wanted to know what the story behind them was. I have a really deep drive to understand everything that I see and hear, which is overwhelming, but it drives me. And when I started seeing that stuff in person, I decided that actually I do care about history. And I started learning about it when I got back to the States after that first trip. And then I made repeated trips just to learn more. And I always went there with very, very little money in my pocket. And I would end up just kind of like walking around Paris or walking around Tbilisi, Georgia, and just looking and observing. And it definitely changed me. Travel has a lot to do with why I teach history and why I read about history.
That's really cool. Just the idea of like something that you enjoy doing in life kind of filtering into the education world. So yeah, that's a cool story. I like hearing people's stories about how they got into stuff.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, the reason that I got Steve on here is after kind of talking with him a little bit, he has an interesting system of grading that he's used in his college class. So why don't you start? Tell us about what is it that you did, this grading system that you use that's pretty different from the traditional scoring of stuff.
Yeah, so I want to be careful in talking about this because I want to make it clear that the students made a choice, and they could have a traditional grading scheme, or they could do this really student-driven, and it honestly, for students for whom unpredictable or what feels a little bit looser in structure, those students did not opt into this. I had a small class. I had 15 students this last semester at the State College, and I asked them at the beginning of the semester, what thing do you prefer? Do you want a traditional course trajectory? I called it option 1 as a creative name. And in that, I gave them a set number of textual summaries, of summaries of ethical challenges, because this is an ethics class, of simple arguments, and then position papers, kind of like building on skill upon skill there. And then content quizzes were a part of it, and they were very typical quizzes, just based on the content and comprehension of the content, and then a final paper. And that was option 1. That was very largely informed by how I have always taught philosophy courses, with some minor modifications. Option 2, I called the mastery-driven course trajectory, and the main components of this were continuous meetings with the instructor, student-selected content options from among a kind of curated library of material that I gathered for them, student and instructor team-designed projects. They could do it solo or as a group, although none of these students wanted to work as a group, I think mainly because they were potentially non-traditional students who were working on their own throughout the week. We met once a week. Even when we went to all online, it was still very segmented. And then they would have a few diagnostic assignments to help to evaluate at the beginning where they were with each of the main skills. And I required regular self-assessment reflections. And the main skills, I just laid it out in the syllabus at the beginning of the semester, were close reading and annotating. I mean, I don't know how detailed we want to be, but I'll just give it to you, and you can cut it if you don't want it. But the main skills were close reading and annotating, identifying perspectives, weighing evidence, considering alternatives, and applying ethical theories to real-life ethical challenges. Those are the 5 main skill areas. And I took notes at the baseline level when we did these early diagnostic assignments, and I then offered them a kind of menu of assignments from which they could choose, and it didn't matter what mode they were using to present evidence of their skill building. And I worked with them to build the skills. That was partly what our workshop time in class was for, but I would work with them, and they would show me evidence that they were progressing in each of the skills. And if they didn't know what that meant, I coached them through showing me, too. And then the idea was that by the time they got to a final project, they would be demonstrating mastery in each of the 5 main skill areas. And then they would do a reflection at the very end, and they would assign themselves a grade. And if I thought it was wildly off, I would give them a reason. I mean, the plan was I didn't actually end up having to veto any grades except in an upward direction. But I had them assign themselves grades and justify it with an argument, with an appeal to each of the skill areas that they had demonstrated quite clearly and explicitly throughout the semester, they had demonstrated upward momentum in those skill areas toward mastery. And so by the time we got to the end, they knew. Usually, it's the teacher. The teacher is the only one in many class settings who knows student X has progressed, say, 3 notches on whatever scale we're using in this skill area. Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, the students were constantly having conversations with one another and with me, and then in self-reflection about their progress in each skill area. And so by the time we got to the end of this semester, everybody had an extremely clear view of how they were exactly how they were doing in the skill areas. So this was tricky to introduce because it doesn't sound like a typical course.
Right.
In fact, every week to week, I had always had this very carefully plotted agenda, this syllabus that had a schedule of readings, required readings for every student, and I had these lectures prepared, and I was really kind of like a stand at the front of the room and cover key terms and explain main concepts and ask and I tried to be Socratic about it, and I think I did a decent job in that mode. But honestly, whether we're talking about kids or adults, nobody can sit there for 2 hours and stay focused.
Yeah.
It really, it's just not, it's not a human thing to ask people to do. And so a big change that I made this time was that I took what I had learned in middle school classrooms and younger grade classrooms, and I applied it in the college classroom, and I made sure I wasn't talking for more than 8 to 10 minutes at a time. And I would give them regular brain breaks, and they would get up and move around, or we would work at the board, or just try to apply those good skills.
Right,
and then I had no schedule of readings. Instead, I took that curated list, and each week I would ask, what are you guys interested in? And, okay, so-and-so, you're working on this skill. You'd like to read from this. You want to read Simone de Beauvoir on the second sex. You can work out in the hallway with a partner if you like. And the rest of us, we're going to talk about John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism right now. And based on just what the needs of the class were, I modified what we did in that classroom. And it sounds like, well, this is something perhaps you would think this is something only college students are really ready to handle. Yeah. But in fact, this mode of teaching was inspired by an elective course I taught to 6th through 8th graders. 2 years in a row, I taught elective courses that were very much the same structure. And one was about the Cold War, and one was about World War I. And students designed their own final projects with my guidance, and it was very skill oriented, and the content, and especially these areas, like if you're teaching a philosophy course, a World War I course, a Cold War course, this stuff is so wide open, and there are so many resources, great resources out there, that rather than pick and choose for them, what I did was present them with a menu and allowed them to tell me what they wanted to learn about, and that was the guide for the class. Okay. It meant somewhat less preparation, but more pressure on the spot to be able to adjust on the fly to meet their needs. And it worked out really well in all 3 cases, the 2 elective courses and this philosophy course.
Okay. So basically what you did is kind of at the beginning of the class, you set up, here are the skills that we're going to learn. And then as you went through, it was more, instead of taking an assignment for grades, it was more about the conversations and reflecting on how they are growing throughout the process, right?
Yeah, it was about monitoring and self-monitoring growth and mastery in skill areas.
Okay. So what made you kind of decide that you wanted to go that route with class?
Well, gosh, I think mostly it came from this realization. I almost stumbled onto it by just when I was trying to teach this Cold War class 2 years ago, when I was trying to design it rather, and I kept thinking, well, what are the topics that I might teach in this class? And when I was brainstorming for the design of the course, I wrote 90 or 100 different questions that people might ask about the Cold War once they start to understand the basics. And I realized that if I were to pick and choose from among these topics, I would be picking and choosing things that were interesting to me, and potentially nobody else cares about these things. Mm-hmm. And rather than making this moral judgment that my vision is superior, the first day was kind of like an information dump with the students, where I was very open with them and saying, look, guys, I have all these really cool questions and topics, and I wrote down as many of the questions as I could fit on the board. I maybe had 70 or 80 questions written on the board, and we went through the questions just so that they understood what the questions meant. And then I said, okay, I want you to each take 3 minutes here, and then on this slip of paper I'm giving you, I want you to copy down 4 or 5 of the questions from this list that seem to be most interesting to you. And we did like a kind of voting system, and we prioritized questions, and then I arranged the next several weeks of class based on what they preferred to learn about, and based on the curated list of resources that I had arranged prior to that point. And I let them direct where the course was going. And then when it came time to do a final project, I started openly discussing again with them, hey guys, what do you think would be neat to do for a final project so that we can demonstrate we're doing some cause and effect thinking, we're doing chronological thinking, and then we're demonstrating what we've learned in terms of the content. What do you guys want to work on? And I started getting all these amazing ideas from them that I was not going to come up with on my own. One student, she built a papier-mâché model of the Berlin Wall, and then she had these little characters that she put on there demonstrating different escape attempts under, over, around the Berlin Wall. And based on her research, she created little tags to put on her physical model to show that the things that she was demonstrating in this model were actually real escape attempts that she had learned about, and then she was able to present that to the class and to her parents at the end of the unit, or at the end of the trimester. And other students did things like they made a podcast. A couple of them made a podcast. Another few, they made a model from this huge foam stuff of depicting a Vietnam War battlefield. And in so doing, I just kind of continuously was checking in with them. We made a plan for completing the project together. I met with each student or student group for 10 or 20 minutes at a time, inside or outside of class time. I stopped thinking of class time as content delivery and started thinking about it as workshop time. Okay. And that experience totally shaped my approach to the college course.
Okay. So bringing in a lot of like student choice, a lot of student feedback and input, allowing them to kind of be creative. How did you see a rise in kind of like engagement with that as well?
Oh my gosh. Not only did I get more engagement right away, but I also had students who never, and when I have brought this same kind of element, like last spring, it was really tough, obviously, for lots of students, lots of teachers. Yes. When it came to the end of the year, I gave my history, 6th grade general history, not my elective kind of special Mr. Capone's favorite subject class that kids had opted into, but my general history class for 6th grade, I gave them the option of picking any historical topic they choose, and working with the skills that we had been explicitly building over the last several weeks online together. And I had students who, when they were given that opportunity, they engaged as they never had shown me before. You know, I had for instance, one student who was really focused on her grades, really wanted to get A's. She always did a great job, always did what was required, but she kind of never asked extra questions or never offered her feedback or opinions about that. I could just tell she wasn't 100% engaged. And during this project, and we had never discussed this particular content before, but she said she wanted to learn about cause and effect as it related to the Exxon Valdez crisis in the oil spill in Alaska. And I said, well, you know what, I don't know very much about that, but you can certainly research it. And, you know, she got the guidelines and she got the stages, and we had some conferences together, and her engagement level skyrocketed. And she was like emailing me way more than she needed to ask all kinds of questions about how to make her project that much better. And that's the level of engagement I saw from almost all. I mean, I don't want to be dishonest. There were some kids who were not engaged for whatever reason, but
right.
Almost all of them were so much more engaged than they had been when I was choosing the content. So I'm going to bring that into this year, and as much as I can, I'm going to let them choose the content. If the skill we're building is map reading, I can give them stuff from ancient China, I can give them stuff from, the city streets in Berlin, and I can give them stuff from locally here in Utah. And as long as the skill that they're demonstrating and that they're building is effectively improved by whatever choice they make inside of those curated options, I think that's going to increase engagement. It's something I owe it to them to try, at least.
Yeah. So for the final grade, was that more, when you had that final reflection, final conference with them, would you say that final grade was based more on like the growth that they showed over the course of the semester, or was it like the final project? How did you determine that?
Well, it honestly was absolutely just about development of skills over the course of the semester. Mm-hmm. I think when I was a newer teacher, I would penalize students for not knowing things I wanted them to know before they got to my class. Somebody would be not particularly well effective argument, and that would end up costing them at the end of the semester. And what I realized is that there were some kids who were in a college setting, grown people to whom I owed respect, who were coming into my classroom and for whatever reason had not been prepared, but they needed to take my course, and then they were at a disadvantage. And that seemed to me to be unjust, simply put. And I really need to meet students where they are, whether they're grown people or whether they're sixth graders or fourth graders, and help them to build confidence and help them to improve. If they come out of this course, whatever course I'm teaching, if they come out of it with thinking skills that are significantly improved from where they came in, that is a success story. Right. And my view of this has changed over the years. I think I wanted everybody to be little Mr. Capones when I started teaching, and I've realized over the years that would be a disaster.
Same. Me too.
We don't need so many pedants running around correcting everybody's grammar and telling stories about the Berlin Wall. Yeah.
One last thing. So you mentioned doing it in college course. You mentioned doing it in middle school. With a lot of people listening are more probably elementary, middle, high school teachers. Typically are going to have some kind of like grade requirements as far as, sometimes they have to have a grade in each week or something like that, posted midterms and all that. What are some, like for anybody who is kind of thinking about doing something like this, what are some maybe ideas that you can share to help kind of implement this kind of grading in class?
Yeah, I think I've been working on this thought myself. It's a challenge for me, too, because I need to be able to demonstrate along the way to parents how my students are doing in my class. And there are a few options, one of which would be just to present a visual skill tracker consistently and this kind of lends itself to the elimination of grades completely. So, it maybe not a really great option. But I philosophically, kind of that's where I have landed on this stuff. I would love to just get rid of the grades. But as long as we're still teaching with grades, we have to give... it seems we have to assign a point value, and on some level this is arbitrary. But I think conferring and conferencing with students individually, ideally, and using class time to do this is great. We don't have to spend all day and all night conferring and conferencing with students, but using our official class time, our synchronous class time, whether in person or not, to meet with individual students in breakout rooms or individually in the classroom and asking them how they think they're doing, gauging, like we do verbal assessments, informal, formative verbal assessments all the time as teachers. And I think that on some level, as long as we have, say, rubrics to guide the expression of our judgment and that show the student, here are some objective measures. And so I guess it's somewhat arbitrary that this is a 3 and this is a 4. But if you can check these skill boxes and you're demonstrating improvement, I'm going to give you a 4 instead of a 3. I personally have a really tough time. I mean, a philosopher at heart, and that's my training. I have a hard time with arbitrariness, and I really don't like the number applied to things. But as long as we have to do it, we have to maybe just bite the bullet, proverbially, and just assign the number. Right. Now, when the students in this college course, when the students would on this track 2 that half of them opted into, when they would complete one of these assignments and then submit it, I would take notes, qualitative notes on a graphic, a table that I had produced. And I can share that with you if you have some way of sharing it with listeners. Yeah. It's something I can definitely make available, and it'll be on my website and stuff. But there would be space for notes where I can literally write, student is demonstrating at the baseline, students demonstrating the ability to identify perspectives by doing X, Y, and Z specifically. And I would point to a few things. And then when we would hope they would move up in meeting an expectation in that skill area, and if we're thinking about a rubric, kind of sliding over to the right or sliding up or down, whichever way improvement is on our chart, then we take a new note. Student has improved by doing X plus 1, Y plus 1, Z plus 1, verbally put. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a lot of area for improvement in this system. I tell the students, kids and adults alike, like I'm in beta here, right? And I always am, and hopefully always will be. And I realize that's kind of a cliche thing to say at this point, but I really invite the students to tell me, like, how do you think this should work? And as long as it's consistent through the semester, and I don't have students thinking this is wildly unfair, right? Then when I tend to get buy-in, and so when I have buy-in, there's less of a risk there. And I hope that I can find a way of objectively communicating consistent standards for my middle school student parents as well as my college students.
Cool. Well, it's a really interesting kind of system and something that I definitely want to look more into just in my own class. One more thing before we go, since this is the 8-bit instructor and we got to get a little bit nerdy up in here.
Awesome.
What is your favorite game?
Well, I definitely can't answer that question because it's kind of like asking me my favorite Grateful Dead song. There are a lot of good ones. I'll tell you my favorite game right now.
Okay, go for it.
Is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Okay. I have since April, and so it's July. I don't want to date your podcast, but it's July now. I started in April, and I think I have about 110 hours logged in that game. And I love it. I love the setting. And exploring the world is a lot of what gaming is about for me. So I spend a lot of time riding around on my horse, exploring new territory, and trying to find every little pocket, every little village. And I love the somewhat magical but realism in that game. And I love games like it. It's just so fun for me to explore.
Awesome. Well, Steve, thanks for being on the show. Tell people real quick, where can they find you online?
Oh, yeah. My website is www.caponeteaches, teaches.com. And I also tweet at Capone Teaches.
Awesome. And I'll stick that stuff in the show notes, and people can get connected with you in any way they want to.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being on here.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's an honor.
before I get into this week's question of the week, I just wanted to take a minute to throw an idea out there for y'all. After last week's episode about the history of grading and my conversation this week with Steve and what he's doing in his classroom with grading, I just wanted to throw it out there that grades have not always been set in stone. As you learned last week, it has gone through a huge change in 100 years. So don't be afraid to try some new things with grades. Granted, you might have to talk to administration and all that. I'm actually trying a new thing this year that I approached my administration about and got the okay. And as I get further into the year, we'll probably do an episode where I kind of talk about that. But don't be afraid to step out there and take chances on some of these ideas. If you have a new idea, something that you want to try, get out there and make it happen. For this week's question of the week, last week we talked about grading already, and this week was kind of similar. So really what I want to know is, how's your year going so far? A lot of people this week after Labor Day started school. Some have been in school for a few weeks now. We're in all different kinds of situations, whether it is fully online to face-to-face to hybrid models to all kinds of different stuff. So how's it going? What's working really well for you this year? What kind of struggles have you had? Use the hashtag 8BitCrew to respond. If you've got longer stories, you can post them in the comment section on the blog page at 8bitinstructor.com. Well, that will just about do it for this episode. Hey, many thanks to Steve Capone for joining me today and sharing some new things that he's doing. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Capone Teaches, or you can check his website out at www.caponeteaches.com, and I will link to those in the show notes as well as some other resources. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure to connect with me on Twitter at Comic Socks, or use the hashtag 8BitCrew. You can check out more content on the blog at 8bitinstructor.com or some tech tutorials on my YouTube channel. If you enjoy this show, make sure that you hit subscribe so that you can catch all the new episodes on your favorite podcast app. And more importantly, tell others about the show. Share it with others who might be interested in joining the community and creating this community of educators who want to create these authentic experiences in class. If you enjoyed the show and want to support the show, make sure you visit my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/8bitinstructor to help out. Lastly, continue getting out there and leveling up your craft in your classroom and creating authentic experiences for your students. So until next week, keep your swords sharp and your shields strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Comic Socks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. See you next week.